our next Attorney General has a history of taking on a fight that was going to be very hard. You take on the Speaker of the House, and you know that there are going to be some very serious repercussions to any sort of loss. You don't take that lightly. You do that based on principle. That is the sort of strength, that's the sort of David versus Goliath struggle that we're facing with Washington. And we need to see strength like that so that when we face those battles over the next few years, we've got someone who is already tested. So we are very, very proud to endorse and welcome our next Attorney General, Ken Paxton.
Yeah.
It is so great to be here. I just got to tell you a little bit of what a statewide candidate gets to do. Last night I was in Denton County, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We finished about 10 o'clock. I drove home. I was on a radio interview from 10 o'clock. It was a Dallas-Fort Worth interview from 10 o'clock to 10:45. Got home at 11, packed, left my house at 11:45, drove to Tyler where we spent the night, got up in the morning, about 8 o'clock we left, went to Nacogdoches where we had meetings with some people in Nacogdoches, left there for a lunch in Lufkin, then we went and met with the TV station, the newspaper, a couple other meetings, then we went to a candidate forum, left Lufkin, and arrived here. That's just a day.
That's an easy one.
Highlight of my day. I came here, the reason it's a highlight for me, my week, my month, is to thank you for your support. It means a lot to me. You all, this small group in Montgomery County, what you did for Ted Cruz, the reverberations that you sent through the state and through the country with your effort, I know is going to be matched with what we do in the statewide effort this time. And so I appreciate your support because I know that your efforts have made a difference nationally, and we need to do that again. For those of you who have been involved in this movement, you know that Texas has a target on its back, and that we are under assault. And I want to explain what I mean by that. Specifically, we are under assault in a couple of different ways. The first is that we're under economic assault. We have been successful in Texas because as a body, as a group of citizen legislators, we haven't been perfect, but we have kept taxes low, we've kept regulation in check, and we've created over a third of the jobs in the United States over the last 10 years. Other states, not as good. Think about it. The states that are controlled by Democratic legislatures, the states that are controlled by Democratic governors, New York, California, Michigan, Illinois. What's common about those states? They're broke. What else? They're losing jobs. And they're losing jobs to places like Texas. As a result, Texas has been attacked by the EPA, whether it's our oil and gas industry. They've tried to stop coal production. We have issues with our power generation now. They've tried to stop our farming industry with the Endangered Species Act. They even tried to shut down some of our fishing offshore. I've been talking to business owners as I've traveled the state, and you would not believe how many of them are under assault. I'll give you one example. I have a constituent, somebody that's been respected in my community in McKinney for 12 years, for the last 12 years that I've been here. He had a construction company. The IRS came in and said that he underpaid his taxes by $400,000. He immediately wrote the check. Now this is a guy that paid $1 million in taxes for 3 straight years. He wrote the check. They still tried to prosecute him for tax evasion. When he wrote the check for $400,000, he also wrote a check for $400,000 for penalties and interest. And he wrote another check for $400,000 for restitution. So he paid $1.2 million extra in taxes. The IRS still came after him. Think about this. They came after him even though 47% of the people don't pay any taxes at all. This guy paid over $4 million in taxes. This is a guy that did mission work in Mexico. He is literally a pillar of the community. And the IRS came after him. And guess what? He pled guilty. And I asked him, I said, why did you plead guilty? I said, I think you could have won this. He said, I could have won it technically, but he said the cost of my company of defending me would have destroyed my company. The 100 people or more that work for me and my family would not have had jobs. And so I pled guilty because I could not afford to fight the IRS. So I went to a sentencing hearing. There were over 100 community leaders that showed up at his sentencing hearing in front of a federal judge in Plano, Texas on a hot summer day. And they showed up to support him. And I sat right next to his wife because I knew the judge and I wanted him to know I was there with her. And despite the fact that he had pled guilty, the judge went after the IRS and said, "What are you doing here? This guy has paid over $4 million in taxes. Why did you go after him?" They didn't have an answer. And so the judge gave him, the IRS wanted this guy to go to prison.
Yeah.
This judge said, "You know what? I'm not going to send him to prison. I'm going to give him community service." After it ended, I went back and talked to the judge because he's a friend of mine. And I said, how did you get to your decision? And he said, "Look, this is insane." He said, these are his words. He said, "This guy paid a hell of a lot of taxes." He said he paid more than most people will ever pay in their lifetime. He said he should not have been prosecuted. But he said, under the sentencing guidelines, I was supposed to send him to prison. I gave him community service because that was the least I could give him. So that's just one example. I've talked to so many people around the state that that's occurred, and I think they're going after people who have a history of being part of our movement, and he was one of them. And so if you don't think this is real, it is happening to this people in the state at every turn, all kinds of businesses, and it's because we have been successful. And I truly believe that's why we're a target. Second, talking about the economic side, we have the political side. If they can turn this state, if they are successful in turning our state democratic, it's over. They control the White House, they control the Senate, they control Congress. Now we can elect some Republicans or conservatives, but they get to control the whole thing. If that happens, there is no transparency, there is no accountability. If we have Benghazi, no one's going to talk about it. The media is not going to talk about it. We're not going to have any hearings. An example of this is Detroit. From 1900 to 1950, Detroit was the most productive American city. In 1950, they were the 4th largest city in America and one of the most productive cities in the world. Shortly after that, guess what they did? They elected the Democrats. And for 60 years, they elected one party. No transparency, no accountability, and Detroit, one of the premier cities in the world, look where they are now. They're bankrupt. And that's where we're headed if we lose this fight. When I talk about political assault, they are attacking us on the way we've drawn our line for redistricting because they want to control our legislators and how many Democrats and Republicans we have. So we are going to continue to be sued over that. Voter ID, why do they care? We're talking about a very simple concept, Steve. A very simple concept is show an ID to vote. We're trying to prevent fraud, that's it. And yet, we've been sued on that. And we actually, can you believe it? We lost. We lost in several lawsuits, and here's why we lost. Indiana had the same law. Guess what? It was okay. Their law was okay. Ours was declared a violation of federal law. And the difference was, we are under the Voting Rights Act. We weren't initially under the Voting Rights Act when they passed it in the 60s, but we were added. There were 6 states that were covered. We were added with 3 other states. And because we were added, the burden of proof changed for us. The Justice Department, when they challenged voter ID in Indiana, they have to prove that Indiana is discriminating. In Texas, because we're under a different standard, we're under the Voting Rights Act, the burden of proof shifts. And we have to prove that we are not discriminating. It's a totally different standard, and one that's almost impossible to beat. And here's what I mean. The court, even though, as Steve would tell you, we allowed people to offer up their driver's license when they vote, their military passports, their military ID. We even offered them a free ID. If you don't have any of those IDs, we'll give you one. And the court said, the circuit court in D.C. said, guess what? You're still discriminating. You know what they said? They said that some people can't afford to drive to get their free ID, and so we're going to say you're still discriminating. Now look, if we can't offer a free ID, what possible solution is there to this? We were going to lose every time. Now fortunately, a few months later when we lost that case, the Supreme Court this was last June, came down with a Shelby case, and they basically said that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which is what put us into this issue, was wrong, that it was a violation of law, and they got rid of it. So guess what? We implemented voter ID in November, and the claims that we were going to suppress the vote, and that there were going to be all kinds of problems, they were all wrong. We had more people vote. We didn't have any problems. And guess what? Despite the success of voter ID, they sued us again. Eric Holder came in and sued us again, and under a different section of the Voting Rights Act, claiming that we're discriminating, and we're back in a lawsuit over voter ID. I'm telling you, the federal government has a target on our back. It's political, it's economic, and if they can beat us either way, they win. And so, these elections coming up, these statewide elections that Julie was just talking about, how many of you ever heard this before? This is the most important election of your life. I want to make a case to you that in Texas that's true. And the reason I believe that's true is, as Julie was just talking about, we haven't elected statewide leaders in 10, 12, 14 years. We're about to potentially elect totally different statewide leaders. And legislators as well. What you do in Texas, what you do in Montgomery County, I believe doesn't just affect what happens in Texas for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I believe with all my heart that what you do here affects the entire nation. Because as I just made the case, we're under assault. We don't survive. We don't stay strong. We're not a Republican state doing the right things. The nation is lost. We are the leaders. Whether you like it or not, we are the economic and political leaders of this nation. And if we fail here, we fail America. And that's why your involvement now is so critical. And so the question is, how do you make your decision? You've got all these new people you've never heard of, people like Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick, and people that you don't really know very well. I've been serving up in North Texas, and my people know me well, but you don't. And how do you decide? And so I think you need to look at a couple of things. One is, you need to look at people's record. Several years ago, what has it been, 6 years maybe? Americans voted to elect Barack Obama as President of the United States. And they did that because he supposedly spoke well, which of course I don't think he was that great of a speaker, but he spoke well. He was charismatic, people liked him, he dressed well, all this stuff. And people failed to go back and look at his record. They didn't look at his record in the Illinois Senate. They would have found that it was abysmal. He didn't vote on half the bills. They didn't look at his U.S. Senate record. He was the most liberal senator on all the rankings. And yet, he didn't talk like that. He talked completely different. He sounded like a moderate, almost a conservative at times, and yet his record was completely different, but no one paid attention to that. In a Republican primary, everyone is going to sound the same. We're all going to be against Obama. Even the agriculture commissioners are against Obama. Isn't that right? Yeah. Everybody's against Obama. We all hate him. Look at the record. The best indicator of future behavior is what people have done in the past. They can say what they want. Look at their record. And I hope that that's what you can do with me. For 11 years, I've had the most consistently conservative record in the Texas House and the Texas Senate. And that's why Texas Eagle Forum gave me 100% of this session, which I was the only senator to get that. That's why Texas for Fiscal Responsibility gave me 100% of this session, which I was the only senator to get that. That's why Young Conservatives Texas has me ranked as their highest rated legislator over the last decade. The record matters. People can say whatever they want, and they will. Look at the record. And I think that's why I've received so many endorsements from Tea Party leaders around the state, why I've received endorsements from the Homeschool Coalition, Texas Right to Life, Texas for Fiscal Responsibility. Our list is numerous. It's why we received endorsements from conservative legislators. Why Rick Santorum. By the way, I was talking to Rick Santorum at 5 o'clock today. and he told me to say hello to you all. I just want you to know that. Look at the record. Second, look for examples of people standing up and saying, actually fighting. My second session was one of my most difficult sessions. I had to come into the Texas House. We'd come in 2003, the Republicans, for the first time, a lot of you may not know this, but for the first time since Reconstruction, the Republicans controlled the Texas House. Everybody thinks now it was forever ago. It wasn't. And we came in and did some amazing things. I had more fun that session. I just thought the Republican Party was perfect. And we tort reform. They told us we were going to have to increase taxes. We didn't do it. We reorganized Health and Human Services, saving billions of dollars. We did redistricting. We did a good job. And so I thought the Republican Party, I thought it was going to be great, straight, clear roads. I came in the next session, and I'm sitting there, and the Republican leadership is trying to pass a budget that's 20% higher than the last budget. I had to vote against my own party's budget. We were trying to pass a tax increase on businesses that I thought was unfair, and it would create an environment where certain businesses could not come to Texas. And I found myself on the Ways and Means Committee as a second termer with 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats, with the Democrats voting no, and then needing all the Republican votes to get their tax bill out, and here I am, the one Republican voting no. That's really not fun. Especially when you get called into the Speaker's office and get told that you need to vote for that, and you have to say no. And then you get called into the governor's office and you get told you have to vote for that, and you say no, with his entire staff sitting around you as he's in your face that far. It's easy to say you're going to stand up against the Obama administration. It's not as easy to stand up to your own party. And if you can't stand up to your own party, how do we know you're going to stand up to the Obama administration? And that's where I challenge you to find examples of people standing up and make them give it to you. If they've been there a while, ask them where they've stood up. I'm just telling you, it's so, every ag commissioner, everyone's going to say they're going to stand up to Obama. Tell me what your example is. Now, that was a tough fight for me because I lost it. And at the end of the session, I actually won the initial battle. It was a payroll tax initially. And they could not get that bill out of committee. I blocked it. So they had to pass my bill. And here I am, I'm a second termer forcing the governor and the Speaker of the House to pass my bill. And my bill was going to reduce property taxes. I got it to the floor of the House, and they tried to amend it back to what it was, and we won 100 to 50. We beat the Speaker of the House, we beat the governor on that. Guess what? They form a conference committee, they don't put me on it, they put people on the conference committee that are against my bill, they kill the bill, we have to go to special session. The Speaker of the House, instead of going through the Ways and Means Committee, creates a new committee that I'm not on anymore, and they pass the margins tax. That's how we get the margins tax. I've also had the opportunity several years ago to run for Speaker. And Speaker was a position that I'd never thought about running for. I never had wanted a position where I had to answer to other politicians. I wanted a position where I had to answer to my constituents. We had a 76-74 majority. Obama had brought in, from where I started, when I started, we had 88 Republicans and 62 Democrats. When Obama came in, we went to 76-74. We had a deal cut by 11 moderate Republicans and 65 Democrats. They kicked most of the Republicans off their committees, and they took over the House. And the Democrats from that time forward controlled the agenda in the House. And Steve can tell you that's true. The next time, 2 years later, Obama was very unpopular, and we went from 76 Republicans to 99, and ultimately 101. And so we're 2 months away from session, and I started calling people. I called our caucus chair, I called leaders in the Republican House. And I said, look, we have a Republican House now, and we can get rid of the Speaker, and we can get rid of the Democrats' control over our House. I could not find a single person that wanted to do that. I begged, I pleaded. I had people close to wanting to do it. A week after the election, I knew that no one was going to do it. And I remember telling my wife, Angela, I said, no one's going to do this. And she looked at me without blinking and she said, you got to do it. And I said, do not tell me that. I don't want the job. She said, how can you look your constituents in the face? How can you look them in the eye and tell them that no one's going to run for this position? that no one cares enough after all these people got you all elected. And so we prayed about it, and we ended up in that race. We had 2 months. And I knew the second I got in that race, I knew that all my committees were going to be gone, and guess what? They were. I knew that I wasn't going to pass bills, and that happened too. I knew that they were going to keep me from making any kind of statements on the floor. I wasn't even allowed to offer amendments after I lost. They were always ruled non-germane. It was redistricting. They split my House seat into 3 different seats. And they tried to put me in one city so that my county commissioner could run against me. The cool thing was, I thought, that's great. I'll just run for the Senate, and I recruited 3 guys to run for my seats. They're all great. So, look for courage, look for record, forget the rhetoric. And let me just finish by saying, just give you a quick update on the campaign. Since I came here last, we picked up, as I said, numerous endorsements. But we've had forums around the state where they've done straw polls after each forum. I've won every single one of those. And we just had one in Denver where Dan Patrick won, and I won. I actually got about 2/3 of the vote compared to my opponents getting a third. My favorite straw poll of all was one that was done in Harris County, which is the home of one of my opponents. And his consultant basically invited this group to this thing called Keep Texas Red. And so all the statewide candidates were invited. We were coming, my other opponent was coming, Abbott was coming. 3 days before the event, they tell us there's going to be a straw poll. Okay, think about this. They're inviting their people. They just told us about the straw poll, and they're doing the polling. How's that sound to you? One of my opponents immediately dropped out. Said, this isn't fair, I think it's rigged. Part of my campaign staff wanted me to drop out. And I thought, okay, what's the downside here? If I go and lose, no one expects me to win. I don't lose anything. So I basically rented a plane, took 10 people, including Michelle Smith, who's with me here tonight. She's with Concerned Women for America. She's the statewide director. I took my wife. I took Scott Turner, who's a great state rep. I took Jody Lovenberg, who's the author of House Bill 2. And we went down really early to this thing. We greeted everybody that showed up. We made our case. We did our speeches. And our goal was to try to finish close. We just didn't finish close, we won it. We won it in their backyard, with their people, with their polling. That's how we've done this campaign. We just fought it out at every corner. And you know what? What you want in your attorney general is somebody who's willing to take those fights, even when it looks like you're going to lose. And secondly, not just take the fight, figure out a way to win. This is all about strategy. You can say you're going to be in the courtroom doing this or that, but you know what? What I've learned as a lawyer and what I've learned in the legislature is strategy is critically important to winning. I've lost. I don't like losing. We need to win. And if you're not strategic in how you plan it, which is the way we're doing our campaign, that's why we're winning these straw polls. That's why we got 2/3 last night. That's why I killed the Tijuana bill, which was a transportation bill that would have cost you a lot of money because they wanted to tax every mile you drove. It's all about strategy. Thank you all for caring. This really is the most important election of your life. Thank you. Oh, I've got to tell you one other thing. We had a great. We had a great weekend. Friday, I flew to Austin. This is another typical campaign day. I got up at 3:30 in the morning, caught a 6 o'clock flight for breakfast that started at 8 in Austin. Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, sat at Ted Cruz's table and got to talk to him a little bit. Then I went over and did a debate at lunch at the Austin Country Club with the Austin Republican women. Had a plane pick me up. We flew to Houston, had a meeting with some potential donors, and then we went to the Fort Bend County Reagan Day dinner. After that was over, we flew back. Michelle Smith picked me up in Terrell, Texas at midnight, spent the night there, and woke up the next morning, went to the Rockwall Republican Men's Club, spoke there, and then we were out in Terrell, Texas with Ted Cruz, and then we went to Allen, Texas with Ted Cruz. There were 1,500 people in Allen. And I appreciated, I don't know if you all have seen this, but I appreciated his comments. He thanked me for being what I told you, which was a fighter for the cause. And we appreciate his encouragement of our campaign. So thank you for what you
You want to hear exactly what Ted Cruz said?
He says it better than me.
He did. Yeah, and he does. Let me say a word about my friend Ken Paxton. You know, the word says, "You shall know them by their fruits." Ken Paxton has represented a great many of you for over a decade in the State House and the State Senate. Ken Paxton is a tireless servant. Ken Paxton stands and fights, whether it's fighting against Obamacare or fighting for voter ID or fighting to defend our religious liberty. And I'm proud to say, Ken Paxton is my friend who fights hard in the state of Texas.